Sometimes, the people we build our world with are the very ones who set it on fire. What does it feel like when trust disappears, not with a scream, but with a signature? No one spoke when Eleanor Hayes walked into the room, but silence has many voices, and this one felt rehearsed. The conference table gleamed under the morning light, spotless, as if even dust had been asked to leave. She had barely taken her seat when Jonathan Ellis, her husband and CEO, stood. Not a glance, not a flicker of doubt. Your position is terminated. Today. Just like that, like dismissing a stranger. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, almost instinctively, her hand rested on the quiet swell beneath her blouse. "Jonathan," she said softly, "I'm pregnant." The pause that followed wasn't compassion, it was calculation. And then, he laughed. Not loudly, just enough to echo. How timely. He gestured toward the door. "Security will assist you." They looked at each other, then not as lovers, not even as enemies, just two people who once shared a life, now sharing a final glance across a battlefield of cold glass and colder hearts. The others in the room averted their eyes, all but Sienna Black, who leaned in slightly, her smile tucked into the corners of her lips like a secret she'd been dying to show. "If we could begin," she said, rising with the kind of grace that only comes when one knows they've already won. She clicked the remote. Charts and numbers bloomed behind her. As seen in this quarter's results, the operations division has shown continuous underperformance. Eleanor's eyes remained on the screen, but her voice broke through. "Those aren't the figures I submitted. They're the ones that matter," Sienna replied, her gaze flicking toward Jonathan, who gave her a quiet nod. "You've been adjusting data to disguise your department's decline." The accusation floated in the air like smoke, bitter, lingering. Eleanor kept her composure. "That's false." "I can prove it. I have the original files." Jonathan didn't let her finish. "We've reviewed your laptop," he said, almost bored. "Evidence confirms data manipulation over several months." He slid a folder across the table. She didn't touch it. Because truth, she knew, doesn't always live in documents. Sometimes it's buried under intentions. Instead, she turned to Harrison Blake, longtime investor, old family friend, the man who once danced at their wedding. "Harrison, this isn't real. You know that." But he looked away, and in that silence, something inside her finally gave in. Jonathan spoke again, not to her, but to the room. The vote was unanimous. Her contribution has diminished. She's no longer essential. No longer essential. As if all the years she spent building, while he networked, smiled, hosted, meant nothing. As if the late nights she coded alone in a one-bedroom apartment hadn't happened. She took a breath. "Jonathan, not here. There are things they don't know. There's nothing left to discuss." His voice was steady. "Final. Practiced. Sienna's been handling your responsibilities for months. The board trusts her. The transition is complete." Sienna stood a little taller. There was no need for gloating now. The throne had already been placed beneath her. "The board has officially confirmed my appointment as Chief Operating Officer," she said. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't scream. But something shifted, in her eyes, in her stillness, in the way she let the moment pass without resistance. This wasn't just a dismissal. It was an erasure, and the worst part? It had been quietly unfolding for months right beside her. Jonathan. Her voice trembled just above a whisper, more breath than sound. "I'm pregnant." For a fleeting second, something crossed his face: shock, maybe even fear. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that familiar, hollow smirk. "Well-timed," he muttered, arching a brow. "But irrelevant. What's done is done." Sienna stepped forward, her heels clicking gently against the tile, hand extended like an actress accepting an award. Company protocol, she said, almost cheerfully. Access cards. Laptop. Please. And then she added drawn-out, deliberate terminated. Eleanor unclasped the lanyard from her neck. Every motion slow, measured. She disconnected her laptop with care, like saying goodbye to something living. As she handed them over, Sienna leaned in close. Her perfume clung like a mask. He never loved you, she whispered. You were a tool, and tools get replaced. The door opened. 2 security officers entered Andre and Leo. Eleanor knew them well. They once brought her cake on her birthday. Now, they couldn't meet her gaze. Please escort Miss Hayes out of the building, Jonathan said, already turning back to the board, as if erasing her presence were a line item to check off. Now, on to our next point. She didn't resist. Let herself be guided to the elevator, head held high. Inside, her thoughts raced calculations, patterns, escape routes. As the doors slid shut, she caught one final glimpse of the boardroom. Jonathan was laughing. Sienna beamed beside him. Around the table, the tension had dissolved. Relief replaced discomfort. Andre shifted beside her, finally breaking the silence. I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes. We're just doing our job. I know, she said softly. How's Elena's pregnancy? His eyes widened. Surprised, she remembered. She's good. We find out next week, boy or girl. Tell her congratulations, Eleanor said, offering a small, composed smile. They walked through the lobby, flanked by glass walls and curious stares. Some employees froze. Others quickly looked away. The unspoken rule was clear: don't get involved. But Eleanor kept her posture steady, her steps dignified. Outside, the summer heat greeted her like a slap. Andre and Leo followed her to her car, uncertainty lingering in their stance. We really are sorry, Leo added quietly. She looked at them both, her expression kind, though tired. It's all right. Take care of your families. She slid into the driver's seat, the door closing with a soft but final click. Only when they walked away did the cracks show. Her hands trembled, her breath hitched. She reached for her personal phone, the one no one at Virion Labs knew about, and scrolled down to a contact labeled simply contingency. She hit call. A woman's voice answered immediately. Eleanor. Has it started? She looked up at the building Virion Labs, its steel logo shining under the sun like a monument to betrayal. It has, she said, voice calmer now, stronger. They made their move. 3 hours later, Eleanor sat in a small, sunlit room in her private apartment tucked near the city's edge. A place Jonathan never visited, never thought twice about. While their main home in Clearview Ridge was a modern showcase for entertaining, this space was hers alone. Surrounded by notebooks, scribbled in haste and hope, her fingers moved swiftly across her personal laptop, one Jonathan had no idea existed. On screen, the foundation of her legacy, the original algorithm. Elegant, intuitive, the code that had once changed an entire industry. 5 years ago, while Jonathan schmoozed investors over cocktails, she sat on a hand-me-down couch, mapping out models by lamplight. He courted money. She built the future. And she still had it all, quietly, carefully. Where they'd dismissed her as discarded, she had already begun again long before they ever let her go. There were nights Eleanor couldn't recall, sleeping only the rhythm of typing, the hum of her processor, and the quiet hope that lived in every line of code. And when it was finally complete, sleek, powerful, transformative, Jonathan had simply said, "Investors respond to certainty, Becca. Let me present it. You get anxious during demos, remember? We're a team, right?" She had smiled, foolishly reassured. That was her first mistake. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. A news alert slid across her screen, Virion Labs to hold emergency press conference tomorrow morning. They weren't wasting time. Eleanor turned to the bookshelf behind her. With practiced fingers, she slid aside a row of worn philosophy texts to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside a thick, carefully labeled folder marked Origin Documentation. She laid it open. Stamped certificates, notarized records, patent approvals, all under her maiden name, Eleanor Lynn, a name she'd quietly returned to, on paper, when the first shadows had crept into her marriage 2 years ago. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Sienna Jonathan wants the house. Please vacate by Friday. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened her contacts and called the one person who, despite his silence, had always cared more for numbers than narratives. Marcus Langford, came the voice on the other end, cool, cautious. We need to meet, Eleanor said, wasting no time. This isn't about the firing, it's bigger, and it directly affects your $100 million. There was a pause, then the Continental, private dining, 1 hour. She ended the call and stood, catching her reflection in the window. Her dark hair pulled back, face calm, jaw set. She looked unchanged. But something inside her had realigned, quiet, steady, unshakable. Her hand moved to her lower abdomen. They have no idea what they've just started, she whispered. The private room at the Continental offered the kind of privacy the city's elite required. When Eleanor arrived, Marcus was already seated, a glass of scotch, untouched, before him. At 62, Marcus wore his experience in the fine lines around his eyes. He had made and lost fortunes, then built them back twice as strong. He was the first investor to believe in Virion Labs. You're handling this remarkably well, he observed as she sat, declining wine with a subtle motion toward her stomach, something he noticed, but didn't comment on. I've been ready for something like this for 1.5 years, she said, ever since Sienna joined. And Jonathan started shifting. He leaned forward, curiosity sharpening. What am I about to see? Eleanor opened her leather case, pulling out the first document. Jonathan showed you proof, or what looked like it. She met his eyes. It was all fabricated. She slid the paper toward him. This is why I asked you here. It was her original patent, the seed from which everything had grown, filed under Eleanor Lynn, 3 months before Virion Labs even existed. Marcus didn't react at first, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he read. Keep going, he said. She placed the second document beside it. A licensing agreement, legally binding, granting Virion Labs the right to use her proprietary technology, signed by Jonathan himself. Before there was a company, there was code, Eleanor said quietly. I created the algorithm that powers Virion. Before I was a wife, before I was a COO, before any of this. Marcus's expression remained unreadable, but she could see the wheels turning. Jonathan handled the pitch decks, the networking, he's great at that. But I built the engine. We had an agreement, equal ownership, shared purpose. Marcus scanned the pages again, more slowly this time. Why didn't you let him take everything, Marcus said quietly. Every investor pitch, every headline. He stood in the spotlight while you stayed in the shadows. Eleanor didn't flinch. Her eyes held a blend of quiet regret and something sharper, steadier. I believed in the we more than the me, she said. That was my mistake. I thought loyalty mattered more than credit. She opened her folder again, unfolding layer after layer of truth. Archived emails explaining technical concepts to Jonathan in layman's terms, screenshots of initial test runs, and a small notebook filled with sketches and logic diagrams, the birth of what would become Virion's core engine. But that's only part of it, she continued, her voice calm, measured. She slid over another set of document spreadsheets, ledgers, account snapshots. These numbers don't match the reports the board was given. Marcus's brow furrowed as he flipped through page after page. His face slowly darkened. This looks like systematic financial misrepresentation, he muttered. It started around the time Sienna came on board, Eleanor added. The company isn't just underperforming, it's being hollowed out. Marcus set the papers down slowly. His jaw was tight. The board needs to see this. Today. A soft buzz interrupted them. Eleanor glanced at her phone and turned the screen toward him. Virion Labs announces emergency press conference. CEO Jonathan Ellis to address corporate restructuring. He's moving faster than I thought, she murmured. Marcus reached for his own phone. I can delay the conference. Buy us time. No, Eleanor said gently but firmly. Let him speak. Let both of them speak. Her steadiness made him pause. You already know what they'll say, don't you? She stood, carefully placing her documents back into her case. I'm not chasing revenge, Marcus. Just the truth. Justice. As they stepped outside, Marcus hesitated. The pregnancy, is it real? She looked at him, her expression unwavering. Yes, 12 weeks. A beat of silence. Jonathan always wanted an heir does more than he wanted to be a father. His driver opened the door. Eleanor moved toward her own car, but Marcus stopped her gently. What do you need from me right now? She considered. Be ready to move fast tomorrow. And you might want to tell your fellow board members to bring their lawyers to the press conference. As Eleanor drove through the soft gold of late afternoon, a small smile tugged at her lips for the first time since the boardroom. Phase 1 was complete. The trap they thought they'd set for her had become the groundwork of their own undoing. Dawn arrived quietly. While news anchors speculated wildly on her fate, Eleanor moved through her apartment with serene focus. The night had gifted her clarity, not sleep. On television, a young anchor spoke with performative enthusiasm. Sources suggest major leadership changes at Virion Labs. Stock is up 2% on rumors that co-founder Eleanor Hayes may be stepping down. Eleanor allowed herself a knowing glance at the screen. Let them celebrate early. Her phone rang. It was Eliza Ward, her longtime friend, attorney, and one of the sharpest minds she knew. I've reviewed everything, Eliza said without preamble. The documentation is airtight. Patent Office confirmed your filings predate incorporation. Injunctions are drafted, just say the word. Thank you, Eleanor replied. Is Judge Everett available? He's on standby, Eliza said dryly. Still owes me for that charity auction disaster last year. Eleanor nodded, thoughtful. Hold until my signal. I want to hear their version of the story first. When she ended the call, she took her time getting ready. Not armor, not disguise intention. She chose a navy blue dress with clean lines, commanding but not loud. Then she reached for a pair of pearl earrings, simple, delicate, once worn by her grandmother on her wedding day. As she fastened them, her fingers lingered. She thought of legacy, of the quiet strength passed down through generations of women who endured, who rose, who rebuilt from ruin. Today she would honor them, not by fighting, but by standing, and letting the truth speak louder than any lie. Legacy. It wasn't just a word, it was a thread. One that wove through the quiet resilience of generations before her. Women who had been tested, cornered, underestimated, yet stood tall without raising their voices. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Eleanor settled onto her sofa, a cup of tea untouched on the table beside her. Her laptop hummed, open and ready. The television volume clicked up, the screen filled with the sleek, modern logo of Virion Labs, the company she had built in code and coffee. The press room was already abuzz. At the center, a gleaming podium, flanked by visuals celebrating technological milestones, most of them born from Eleanor's notebooks. Then he entered. Jonathan Ellis, all charm and poise, flanked by sienna black, 2 steps behind, wearing a navy sheath dress nearly identical to what Eleanor often wore for public appearances. Not a coincidence, a signal. Good morning, Jonathan began, Voice warm, practiced. Thank you for being here on short notice. As Virion Labs continues its extraordinary growth, we must, at times, make difficult leadership decisions to ensure we remain at the forefront of innovation. Eleanor's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Her expression was unreadable. Jonathan continued, his tone shifting into faux sincerity. It is with regret that I announce the departure of Eleanor Hayes from her role as Chief Operating Officer. Eleanor has played a significant part in our early growth, and we are deeply grateful. She typed a single word into her secure chat with Eliza now. On screen, Jonathan's performance went on. While we hoped for a smooth transition, recent personal challenges have made that difficult. Eleanor has been experiencing emotional strain that has begun to affect her professional judgment. Right on cue, Sienna reached out, resting a hand on his arm, as if offering emotional support. It was a calculated pose. Jonathan's voice dropped into a tone of supposed concern. We tried to handle this quietly, with compassion, but Eleanor's behavior has become increasingly erratic and dangerous to the company's integrity. Eleanor's gaze hardened. The narrative she had anticipated paint her as unstable, discredit her before she could speak. Jonathan straightened. I'm pleased to announce that Sienna Black will assume the role of Chief Operating Officer. Her leadership as my executive assistant has demonstrated exceptional insight and capability. Sienna stepped forward to the microphone, chin high. I'm honored by this trust. Though the circumstances are unfortunate, I'm committed to honoring the foundation Eleanor laid and to leading Virion into its next chapter. On Eleanor's laptop, a new message flashed. Injunctions filed. Judge Everett, signing now. Eliza Eleanor allowed herself the faintest smile. Cool. Controlled. Let the reckoning begin. Back on the broadcast, a journalist stood. Mr. Ellis, can you elaborate on Ms. Hayes's condition? What exactly has been so concerning? Jonathan adopted a careful expression, strained, sorrowful. Out of respect for Eleanor, I'd prefer not to detail specific incidents. It's both a personal and professional matter. And then it happened. A sudden wave of alert tones buzzed through the press room. Phones vibrated. Journalists looked down. Then one seated in the front row looked up wide-eyed. Mr. Ellis, she said clearly, we're receiving reports that emergency injunctions have just been filed, legally barring Virion Labs from using certain proprietary algorithms and software. Murmurs filled the room. Cameras zoomed in. She continued, voice rising slightly. The filings claim that these technologies are actually the intellectual property of Eleanor Lynn, Ms. Hayes's legal name at the time of patent registration, and that Virion was only granted limited licensing rights. For the briefest moment, Jonathan froze. His face, always so composed, flickered, a sliver of panic. Then the mask returned. I'm not aware of any such filings, he said, forced calm in his voice. This sounds like unfortunate confusion. But the room had already shifted. The control was gone. And Eleanor, watching from her modest apartment, knew the narrative was no longer his to control. Another reporter's voice cut sharply through the chaos. Miss Lynn's filings show she patented the core algorithm before Virion Labs existed. Does this mean the company has no legal right to its primary products? The room erupted. Questions poured in, journalists speaking over one another. The narrative had slipped from Jonathan's hands. Sienna leaned in toward him, her whisper urgent, sharp. Jonathan's confident exterior cracked as he glanced down at his phone, now flashing with headlines, legal alerts, and stock updates. We'll need to review these claims before offering any official comment, he managed, his voice strained, brittle. This press conference is concluded. Thank you. And with that, they turned from the podium, their retreat almost drowned in the barrage of unanswered questions. Across the city, Eleanor calmly sipped her tea, the porcelain cup steady in her hand. She watched the broadcast in silence, her eyes cool. Everything was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. Her phone rang. Marcus Langford. The board is in emergency session, he said without greeting. Jonathan claims it's all a fabrication. He's calling it an emotional breakdown. His lawyers painting you as disturbed, unstable. As expected, Eleanor replied evenly. A pause. Then Marcus asked, more carefully this time, "What's your end game, Eleanor?" She closed her eyes for a moment, then answered, not with rage, but with clarity. Truth, Marcus. That's all. And with every lie they tell, they build their own grave a little deeper. After the call ended, she opened another folder on her laptop. Phase 2. Months of contingency work. A chessboard only she could see. By noon, Virion's stock had plummeted 18%. Investors were panicking, unsure whether the company even owned its own crown jewel. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, slicing fruit. Her movements were calm, focused. Nutrition was no longer just about her, it was for the life growing inside her too. Her phone buzzed. Constantly. Calls from board members, executives, even old classmates now working in tech media. She answered none of them. To all, she replied with the same message, I will address all questions tomorrow. Let them twist. Let them scramble. Let them try to plug a ship already taking on water. A knock broke her focus. She checked the security feed. Sienna Black. Alone. No driver. No cameras. No smug smile. Eleanor opened the door, but didn't step aside. This is unexpected. Sienna's makeup, flawless on camera, couldn't mask the tension in her face now. Can I come in? I need to talk. Away from him. Away from everyone. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Why would I trust anything you have to say? Sienna's voice softened. Because I have something you need. And because he betrayed both of us. A beat passed. Then, reluctantly, Eleanor stepped aside only slightly. You've got 5 minutes, and you're not going past the foyer. Sienna stepped inside, glancing around the modest, sunlit apartment. He doesn't know about this place, does he? Your 5 minutes are ticking, Eleanor said coolly. Sienna straightened. I want to help you. Eleanor let out a low, humorless laugh. After helping him fire me? After whispering in my ear that he never loved me? Try again. Sienna looked down. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. I was wrong. About everything. She paused, struggling to steady herself. I thought he and I were real. I thought if you were out of the picture, I'd have the title, the respect. Maybe even him. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a flash drive. But last night, after the board meeting, I overheard Jonathan on the phone. With Lawrence Chen, from Global Tech. Eleanor's expression darkened. Global Tech had been circling Virion for years, looking for a buyout opportunity. He's selling the company, Sienna said. He promoted me to calm things down, make it look stable. But the deal's already moving. She swallowed, and he laughed. Said neither of us would matter once he cashed out. Eleanor didn't speak, not right away. Because in that moment she saw it all, the game behind the curtain. The man who had used her mind, then used Sienna's ambition. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt resolved. Eleanor kept her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. And I'm supposed to believe you've suddenly grown a conscience? Sienna didn't flinch. She held up the flash drive like an offering. I recorded the call, she said, and other things you need to hear. I wanted your job, she admitted, but not your humiliation. What he did to you crossed the line. Eleanor didn't reach for the drive. Why now? Why turn on him now? Sienna's voice, Mitsal's voice, for once trembled. Because I finally realized I was never special. I was a placeholder, a tool. Just like you were. The cracks beneath her polished facade began to show, and what he said about your pregnancy, it was cruel, beyond cruel. Eleanor studied her closely. It could be a trap, a ploy Jonathan devised to plant misinformation or gain intel, but the fear in Sienna's eyes looked real. If this is some kind of setup, it's not, Sienna cut in. Run every file through your own systems. Tear them apart. I'll get more if you want, whatever you need. Finally, Eleanor took the drive, though she had no intention of letting it near any system she hadn't personally firewalled. If what you say is true, she said quietly, what are you asking for in return? Protection. The word came without hesitation. When everything falls apart, I don't want to go down with him. I have messages, texts, emails showing Jonathan told me to manipulate financials. I was following orders. I'm not innocent, but I wasn't the architect either. Eleanor didn't disagree. Sienna was no pawn, but she wasn't the king either. I can help you bring him down fully, Sienna added. Eleanor stared at her. The woman who had tried to replace her, now looking for rescue. She saw it, then not just guilt or fear, but survival. And Sienna Black was nothing if not a survivor. These are my terms, Eleanor said, her voice firm. You keep playing your role. You stay beside him, same as always. But from now on, you report to me. Everything. Every word, every whisper, every reaction to today. You provide any documentation I ask for. And if your intel proves truthful and useful, when this is over, you walk away untouched. Sienna nodded without delay. I can do that. One more thing, Eleanor added, her voice like steel. If I find out you're playing both sides, if you lie to me, if this is all some charade, then what happened to Virion's stock today will look like a light drizzle before the storm I bring to your doorstep. Do we understand each other? Sienna's voice was almost a whisper, crystal clear. After she left, Eleanor sat, with the flash drive in her hand, weighing its potential and its danger. A possible ally inside the enemy's walls. Valuable, but volatile. Her phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID made her pause. Her doctor. She picked up. Mrs. Hayes? This is Dr. Liu. I just wanted to let you know your blood work looks fantastic. The pregnancy's progressing beautifully. Would you like to know the gender? It's in the latest results. Eleanor placed a gentle hand over her abdomen. Everything else faded. Yes, she said softly. I'd like to know. There was silence. And then a quiet confirmation. A daughter. For the first time that day, Eleanor truly smiled. Not out of strategy or satisfaction, but something deeper. A promise. She ended the call and looked out the window, the city humming in the distance. Now, she whispered, the real game begins. But Jonathan Ellis had his own pieces moving. Less than 3 hours after Sienna had stepped out of Eleanor's apartment, her secure line rang one only 5 people had access to. The caller ID stopped her cold. Jonathan. She answered, her tone careful. Hello, Jonathan. His voice, when it came, was calm, eerily so. Sending my mistress to spy on me, he murmured. I expected better from you, Becca. She felt a chill, but kept her voice even. Seems her loyalty didn't last as long as you thought. Jonathan chuckled. Sienna's been called many things, but disloyal? Not to me. There was smug satisfaction in his tone. And then, the blow the flash drive she gave you. Jonathan's voice slithered through the speaker, smooth and venom-laced. The flash drive was laced with tracking software. The moment you connected it to a device, we'd have access to everything. Honestly, Eleanor trusting Sienna? Amateur mistake. Eleanor let a small smile flicker at the corner of her mouth. She hadn't connected it to anything. She'd handed it off to a cybersecurity expert who worked in a cold lab. No network, no Wi-Fi, no connections to trace. Interesting assumption, she replied coolly. But then again, you've always underestimated me. A pause. Subtle, but telling. It wasn't the response he expected. The injunctions were cute, Jonathan said, his voice tightening. But my lawyers are filing countersuits as we speak. You signed agreements, remember? Everything you built, every line of code belongs to Virion Labs. After the patents were already filed in my maiden name, Eleanor reminded him, and after you signed a licensing agreement you clearly never bothered to read. Tell me, Jonathan, were you too busy charming investors? Or too busy sleeping with your assistant? His sharp inhale wasn't audible, but she could feel it. She'd struck something raw. You've made a serious miscalculation, he snapped. His voice dropped low, threatening now. I've frozen every account you had access to. Your health insurance is terminated. The locks at the house have been changed. He paused. How long can you fight a billion-dollar machine with no income, no insurance, and nowhere to live? Eleanor had prepared for this. Every strike had been pre-mapped. I'm touched by your concern for my financial well-being, she said lightly. Really, Jonathan, it almost sounds like affection. This isn't a game, he said sharply. You're pregnant, supposedly. Is this really how you want to start motherhood? Broke? Blacklisted? Alone? There was a time, maybe months ago, when that would have cut deep, but that Eleanor no longer existed. She tilted her head slightly, thoughtful. When did you decide I was no longer useful? Her voice was almost clinical. Was it when Sienna arrived? Or long before that? You did it to yourself, he answered, cold and practiced. When you stopped being an asset and became a liability, you couldn't keep up. Your vision was limited. The company had to evolve. Eleanor gave a short, disbelieving laugh. My limited vision is the reason Virion exists. The algorithm that built your empire, I wrote that, in silence, while you practiced your speeches into the mirror. It's outdated, Jonathan said quickly. Sienna's helping me lead Virion into its next phase. You were holding us back. Us. Eleanor filed that word away, confirmation of what she'd suspected all along. I have a board meeting in 5 minutes, Jonathan said, shifting back into CEO mode. So here's what happens now. You withdraw the injunctions. You sign a quiet resignation. You take a settlement respectable, discreet. In return, I don't burn what's left of your reputation. And if I don't, Eleanor asked, her tone unchanged. Then I'll make sure the world knows the real you, he replied, cold as stone. Your mental instability, your obsessive jealousy, that you tried to destroy your own company out of spite. Let's see, who do you think they'll believe? The calm, successful CEO? Or the unstable wife who couldn't handle being replaced professionally or personally? The line went quiet. The threat hung heavy. A final warning. A last attempt to intimidate. Eleanor didn't flinch. I'll consider your generous offer, she said, voice smooth as glass. You have until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, Jonathan snapped. After that, things get very ugly, very public. The call ended. Eleanor remained still. Not stunned, not scared. Processing. Jonathan had finally revealed the part of himself he had always kept hidden behind smiles and champagne toasts. He wasn't just ruthless. He was willing to destroy her. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Meeting compromised. Victoria Waring, wire. Be careful. Friend at Virion, Eleanor froze, eyes narrowing. Someone inside was watching. Helping her, but who? And more importantly, why? Another message arrived. Her cybersecurity contact called with a quiet urgency. The flash drive was laced with advanced surveillance malware, he said. Professional grade. The files inside? Fake, planted to gain full access the moment they hit a connected system. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her phone. So it had been a trap. Sienna had been sent. or perhaps used without knowing. Either way, Jonathan had crossed into new territory. The shock passed quickly, replaced by something colder, sharper. The game had shifted, and its players were far more ruthless than even she had anticipated. She dialed Eliza without hesitation. He called, Eleanor said, voice low. Threats, of course. And apparently, Sienna was wearing a wire when she visited. Did you say anything that could be used against you? Eliza asked instantly. Nothing that can't be dismissed as the emotional venting of a betrayed spouse, Eleanor replied. But he's threatened to attack my mental health publicly if I don't drop the injunctions by morning. Classic abuser playbook, Eliza muttered. Discredit the victim so no one listens. But we planned for this. We did, Eleanor agreed. But he's accelerating. A contact just told me he's in a board meeting right now. I think he's trying to push through the global tech sale before we can stop him. He can't push a sale without a vote, Eliza reminded her. And Marcus Langford will stall any motion. But I'm more worried about your safety. If he tried to entrap you, what's next? Eleanor's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach. The baby, his child. Though Jonathan hadn't shown the slightest interest in that reality. I need to relocate, she said. Contingency plan. Tonight. And we need to move the legal timeline up. Can you get Judge Everett first thing in the morning? I'm already on it, Eliza confirmed. And Eleanor, don't stay alone tonight. He knows where you live. Eleanor moved quickly. She packed what mattered legal documents, clean backups, encrypted drives. The rest clothes, objects, memories were replaceable. In the underground garage, as she loaded the car, a strange tingle crept up her spine. She looked toward the entrance just in time to see a dark sedan pulling away far too quickly. Surveillance. It didn't surprise her, but now it was no longer theoretical. It was real, immediate, present. She reached for her phone to call Marcus, then staggered slightly. A wave of dizziness hit hard, sudden. She braced herself against the car door, eyes closed, breath shallow. Just pregnancy symptoms, she told herself. Stress, not enough food, too many fires at once. But another thought surfaced, unbidden and far more chilling. What if Jonathan's threats weren't just about money or reputation? What if he saw this pregnancy, this child, as just another problem to eliminate? The idea struck deeper than anything he had said aloud, and it stayed with her as she drove. The safe house sat on the quiet edge of Lake Travis, hidden behind layers of legal ownership, LLCs, and trusts carefully structured to leave no breadcrumbs. She'd purchased it years ago with the proceeds of quiet investments, ones Jonathan never knew existed. They had grown steadily, thanks to her own predictive models' proof that her work had never stopped being powerful. By sunset, the spare bedroom had transformed into a command center. Laptops hummed softly. Encrypted channels were live. Her circle of allies, small, loyal, effective, was beginning to move and sync. Then came the confirmation she dreaded. Marcus called. You were right, he said without preamble. Jonathan's pushing the sale fast. He's telling the board that global tech is the only lifeline left after your injunctions. He's spinning this as an emergency solution to protect shareholders. Eleanor closed her eyes. He wasn't just trying to erase her. He was trying to sell the very thing she had built and walk away with everything. But this time, he wouldn't be the one writing the ending. They've got the resources to fight your injunctions, Marcus said through an encrypted video call. His face was drawn, the lake house light reflecting off his glasses. He's offering a premium to the board. Some are listening, even though it reeks of desperation. How much time do we have? Eleanor asked, her tone sharp but steady. Votes scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I managed to delay it demanded proper due diligence, but today's stock drop rattled a few people. They're vulnerable now. Eleanor took a slow breath. The window behind her showed only shadows. Then we move faster than planned, she said. Can you ensure the entire board is present? Remote members too? Already done, Marcus nodded. But Eleanor, he's painting you as unstable, emotional, bitter. He's even claiming you tried to sabotage Virian's systems after your termination. All of it is expected, Eleanor replied calmly. But tomorrow, they won't hear rumors. They'll hear the truth directly from me. After the call, Eleanor mobilized her growing team. The cybersecurity analysts continued dissecting the malware from Sienna's flash drive. The forensic accountants were assembling undeniable evidence of financial misconduct. And a PR firm, briefed quietly and discreetly, stood ready to guide the narrative when the storm inevitably broke. Near midnight, she stepped outside to the lake house deck. A cup of herbal tea warmed her hands. The moonlight danced across the surface of Lake Travis, calm, quiet, indifferent to the war being waged in boardrooms and servers. Her phone buzzed. Unlisted number. She hesitated, then answered. Eleanor, it's Michael Giao. She froze. Michael had been her first hire at Virion. A systems architect, with a mind like an engine, he'd taken her vision and made it scalable. Michael, she said cautiously, this isn't a secure line. I know, he replied quickly. I don't have long. I was the one who sent the warning. About Sienna. Eleanor's hand tightened around the mug. Jonathan has the entire dev team working overnight, Michael continued. They're trying to tweak your algorithm, make it look different enough to dodge the patent. She didn't sound surprised. Will they succeed? No, Michael said firmly. They're just repainting the surface. The core is yours. Always will be. But that's not all. His voice dropped. He's ordered a server wipe. All historical files. Every version of your code. Every internal commit with your name. Scheduled for 6 a.m. sharp before the markets open. Eleanor went still. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was erasure. He was trying to rewrite history one in which she had never existed. Thank you, Michael, she said, her voice quieter now. Be careful. One more thing, he added quickly. Check your personal email. The private one. I sent you something important. She ended the call and moved inside, opening her most secure laptop. A single message waited. From Michael. No subject line. Just an attachment. A video file. Eleanor clicked play. The feed came from the development lab. That evening, the timestamp showed Jonathan Ellis, standing before the team, gesturing to a projection. His voice was clear, confident, cold. I don't care if it's technically illegal. By the time anyone proves anything, we'll be rich. The company will be sold and we'll have enough to handle the fallout. Just get it done. Eleanor stared at the screen for several seconds after the video ended. Then she quietly saved the file to multiple encrypted locations. Evidence. Undeniable. Tomorrow, it would become a weapon. She moved toward the bedroom, exhaustion beginning to claim her. But as she lowered herself onto the mattress, a wave of dizziness hit. Then a sharp cramp. Eleanor sat carefully at the edge of the bed, one hand instinctively pressed to her stomach. She breathed through it, slowly, eyes shut, waiting for it to pass. Just stress, she told herself. Not enough food, too much adrenaline. But somewhere, beneath the logic, a darker thought stirred. What if Jonathan's threats had always gone deeper than reputation? What if to him, the child she carried was just another obstacle? As soon as the pain eased, she picked up the phone. Doctor. Lou, she said when the emergency line picked up. It's Eleanor Hayes. I'm having some dizziness and cramping. I need to come in. Dr. Lou's voice was calm clinical, yet unmistakably concerned. How severe is the cramping? Any bleeding? No bleeding, Eleanor replied, steadying her voice. But the cramping's getting worse, and I've had several dizzy spells today. There was a brief silence on the line. Given your condition and the level of stress you're under, Dr. Liu hesitated. I'd like you to come in for monitoring. Stress has a way of showing up in the body, she added gently, and based on the headlines I've seen tonight, you're carrying a heavier weight than most. Eleanor hesitated. A hospital visit meant visibility. Risk. If Jonathan had people watching the usual clinics, a single wrong move could compromise everything. As if reading her mind, Dr. Liu continued, I understand your concerns. We can bring you through a private entrance and admit you under a pseudonym, if needed. Another cramp. Sharper this time. The choice was made. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Eleanor said. At 2 a.m., the hospital corridors were hushed and still an unfamiliar kind of peace. A nurse guided Eleanor quietly through a side entrance and into a private suite in the maternity ward. Just as promised, she was admitted under the name Sarah Chen. Dr. Liu arrived minutes later, examining her carefully. Your blood pressure's elevated, she said, and you're dehydrated. Not dangerous, not yet, but not something to ignore either. Eleanor gave a faint nod as the nurse set up an IV drip. Warm fluid began to flow into her system, paired with medication to relax the uterine muscles. I need to be discharged by 7, Eleanor said softly. There's something I have to take care of personally. Dr. Liu frowned. Medically, I'd prefer you stay. 24 hours of rest would do a world of good for both of you. I understand, Eleanor said gently, but that's not possible. After tomorrow, I'll rest, I promise. Dr. Liu studied her, torn between professional duty and respect for the quiet power in Eleanor's voice. Then we'll monitor you closely. If the cramping subsides and your vitals stabilize, I'll discharge you with strict limitations. She hesitated before leaving. Eleanor, your body is speaking to you. Don't ignore what it's trying to say. When the room was quiet again, Eleanor sank back into the pillows. One hand instinctively rested on her belly. Beside her, the monitor gave off steady, rhythmic beeps, the heartbeat of a life untouched by boardroom politics, media spins, or legal battles. A tiny, resilient heart, still strong. We're going to fix this, she whispered, and then we'll build something better. Something honest. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days slept. Dawn arrived with gentler light and a breath of clarity. The cramping had stopped. Her blood pressure had lowered. Reluctantly, Dr. Liu handed her the discharge forms at 6:30 a.m. Whatever you're facing today, promise me this, the doctor said, handing Eleanor a medical-grade water bottle. Sit when you can, stay hydrated. Don't push beyond reason. I promise, Eleanor said quietly. After today, everything changes. Through a private exit tucked behind the maternity ward, Eleanor stepped into the fresh morning air. She checked her phone. One by one, confirmations began appearing on the screen. Michael had successfully diverted the server wipe and preserved key historical records. The forensic team had finalized their report on financial misconduct. Judge Everett had confirmed the emergency hearing 8:00 a.m. sharp. Everything was in motion, and for the first time, the timing was hers. Everything was in place. At 7:45 a.m., Eleanor stepped through the courthouse's discreet side entrance, a hooded coat masking her hospital bracelet still clinging to her wrist. Eliza was already waiting in the private conference room, her brows drawing together in concern at the sight. You came straight from the hospital? She asked. Eleanor gave a brief nod. Minor pregnancy complications. Stable now, she said quietly. Let's stay focused. Is Judge Everett ready? Eliza hesitated, then nodded. He's reviewed the emergency filing. Given the documentation and the time sensitivity around the potential sale, he's leaning in our favor. She lowered her voice. Jonathan's attorneys arrived 10 minutes ago. They looked caught off guard, like they didn't think you'd move this fast. At exactly 8:00 a.m., Eleanor walked into Judge Everett's chambers, her posture calm, her eyes sharp. Across the room, Jonathan's legal team stood visibly surprised to see her in person. They had clearly expected her attorney to appear alone. "Ms. Hayes," Judge Everett greeted formally, "I've reviewed your petition. These are serious allegations both against Virion Labs and its leadership." "Thank you for hearing us on short notice, Your Honor," Eleanor replied, her voice clear. Jonathan's lead attorney stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Your Honor, these are the retaliatory actions of a disgruntled former COO. Ms. Hayes was terminated yesterday for cause and is now trying to sabotage the company out of spite." Judge Everett arched an eyebrow. "I've seen the patent documentation, Mr. Dalton. It predates the company's incorporation and is registered to Ms. Hayes's legal name at the time. I also see a licensing agreement signed by Mr. Ellis himself. We contest the validity of those documents," the attorney said quickly, "and Ms. Hayes signed employment contracts assigning all intellectual property to the company." Eliza stepped forward, calm but firm. "Your Honor, the employment agreement specifically excludes pre-existing intellectual property as noted in Appendix B, which bears Mr. Ellis's initials." Judge Everett turned to the pages, reading carefully. Then he looked back up at the defense. These seemed clear and properly executed. "Do you have evidence contesting the filing date or the exclusion clause?" A tense silence passed. The attorneys exchanged glances. "We'll need time to prepare a full response, Your Honor." "Unfortunately, time is the very issue at hand," Judge Everett replied, his tone sharpening. "I understand Virion's board is voting today on a potential acquisition by Global Tech, a sale that would include this contested technology." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice even. "We're not asking for a final ruling today, Your Honor. Only for an expanded temporary injunction to prevent the transfer of any intellectual property until rightful ownership is determined." The judge turned to Jonathan's attorney again. "Response?" The man straightened, shifting into corporate panic mode. "Delaying this transaction could cause irreparable harm to Virion Labs. The company's stock has already fallen 18% due to Ms. Hayes's filings. A further delay may cripple shareholder value." Judge Everett didn't blink. "And transferring technology that may have been misappropriated could cause irreparable harm to Ms. Hayes." He paused. "I've reviewed the evidence. Effective immediately, the court is granting the expanded injunction. Virion Labs is prohibited from selling, licensing, or otherwise transferring any of the disputed intellectual property until a full hearing can take place." A wave of relief pulsed through Eleanor, but she kept her expression composed. Then the judge added, "Furthermore, I'm appointing a special master to oversee Virion's operations," Judge Everett concluded, voice clear and absolute. "Until ownership of the intellectual property is resolved, neither party may make major business decisions involving the disputed technology without direct court approval." The defense erupted in protest, their words clashing with each other in rising tones. But Eleanor exchanged a quiet glance with Eliza. This was unexpected, and a gift. The court hadn't just blocked the sale, it had taken away Jonathan's authority to act. For now, he was neutralized. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor checked her phone. A flood of messages, all from Marcus. The board meeting had been moved up. Jonathan was trying to push the sale through before the injunction reached the room. "He's making his final move," Eleanor said, already striding toward the car. "We need to get to Virion, now." The glass towers of Virion Labs shimmered under the morning sun, pristine, sterile, blinding. But beneath the polish, something rotten had begun to surface. As Eleanor's car pulled into the executive entrance, she made no move to hide the hospital bracelet on her wrist. Let them see it. Let it remind them this is what his ambition cost her. Marcus was waiting at the private elevator, his expression dark. He's presenting the deal like it's already done, he said as the doors closed behind them, telling the board the legal issues are minor, that everything will be fine after the sale closes. Some are buying it. Has he seen the injunction? Eleanor asked, scanning her screen one last time. No, I don't think he knows yet, Eleanor nodded. And Sienna, front and center, playing loyal. The elevator opened directly onto the executive floor. Through the glass wall of the boardroom, Eleanor could see the scene already in motion. Jonathan, at the head of the table, speaking with theatrical certainty. Sienna, standing behind him, her expression carefully composed. Around the table, faces split between concern, weariness, and reluctant trust. Eleanor paused, just outside, one hand brushing gently across her stomach, a silent promise. This isn't just about the company anymore. Ready? Marcus asked quietly. Eleanor's eyes never left the glass. I've been ready since the day I wrote the first line of code. The moment she and Marcus stepped into the room, the energy shifted. Jonathan froze, mid-sentence. His expression faltered just for a breath. Then he recovered, slipping into the familiar role-carrying husband, concerned executive. Eleanor, he began, his voice coated in concern. This isn't appropriate. You're clearly not well. He gestured toward her wrist, as if her hospital bracelet were an indictment. Around the table, a few board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Was he implying that this pregnant woman, one of the company's founders, was unstable? I'm perfectly well, Eleanor said, her voice steady and unshakable. Though I did spend the night in the hospital, due to complications brought on by surprise stress. Stress that can be directly traced to you. Before Jonathan could pivot, Eleanor turned to the board. Members of the board, I apologize for this interruption, but I've just come from an emergency federal hearing. Judge Everett has granted an expanded injunction, one that explicitly prohibits the sale you are currently discussing. She handed copies of the court order to Marcus, who distributed them one by one around the table. Jonathan's facade began to crack. This is absurd, he snapped. She's trying to burn everything down out of spite. Eleanor didn't flinch. The court has also appointed a special master to oversee Virion's operations until the intellectual property dispute is resolved. That means any vote you take today to approve this sale would be in direct violation of a federal court order. Silence rippled through the room like a dropped stone. Legal counsel leaned in urgently to whisper in the ear of the chairman. Several board members now looked visibly uneasy. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. This is a stall tactic. Nothing more. Her claims, her entire case, have no merit. But his voice had changed. Gone was the calm, confident CEO. In his place, a man whose empire had just been caught crumbling beneath him. Merit? Jonathan scoffed. Our legal team will have this injunction overturned by tomorrow. Perhaps, Eleanor replied coolly, but Global Tech won't move forward with a deal clouded by federal injunctions and unresolved IP disputes, and certainly not when they learn about the financial irregularities. A silence dropped into the room like a stone. Across the table, Catherine Westbrook, chair of the audit committee, leaned forward. What irregularities? Eleanor gave a nod to Marcus, who stepped forward and began distributing a fresh set of documents, thick, color-coded, devastating. These are forensic audit reports, Eleanor explained, her voice composed. They show a pattern of financial manipulation going back 18 months, revenue overstated, expenses buried in shell subsidiaries, performance metrics entirely fabricated. Jonathan's face flushed, his veneer slipping. This is a lie, he snapped. Desperate theatrics from someone trying to torch the company she used to run. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. The documents speak for themselves. The methodology is included. I invite your internal audit team to verify everything. Catherine was already flipping through the pages, her brows furrowing with every line. These reference internal accounts I've never seen in our official reporting. They were hidden from the audit committee, Eleanor said, deliberately. Mr. Langford has already reviewed the full set as part of his independent due diligence. Marcus gave a slow, solemn nod. They're real, and they're substantial. Jonathan's grip on the room was unraveling. You're all being played, he shouted. This is a coordinated attack on the company. She was terminated for cause. She has no standing here. Eleanor didn't flinch. About that termination? Her voice chilled. I believe the board deserves to know what actually happened. She placed a sleek black USB drive on the table. This contains proof that I developed Virion's core technology before it was even incorporated, that I patented it under my legal name and licensed it to the company. It also includes documentation of my direct contributions to every major breakthrough Virion has released since its founding. Jonathan stepped toward her, voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. You need to leave. Now. Eleanor stood her ground. I'm not going anywhere, Jonathan. Not this time. For a moment, the room froze. Then, unexpectedly, Sienna stepped forward. She reached out, a hand gently resting on Jonathan's arm. Jonathan, maybe we should take a break. Talk to legal. Just regroup. The moment was telling. It wasn't support, it was damage control. But Jonathan shook her off with a jerk. I don't need a break, he snapped. What I need is for my unstable, vindictive ex-COO to be removed from this meeting. He turned to the security team standing by the door. Escort Ms. Hayes out. Now. The guards hesitated. Eyes shifted toward the head of the table. Eleanor turned to him, James Abernathy, the chairman. His expression unreadable. Mr. Abernathy, Eleanor said calmly, before you authorize anything, you should know federal investigators are reviewing the same documentation you now hold. The evidence points to securities fraud. If you remove me, knowing that, and allow a sale to proceed, you're legally complicit. Abernathy, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. No one is removing anyone. He sat up straighter, his voice commanding. Not until we understand exactly what's happening here. He turned slowly to Jonathan. These allegations are serious, very serious. We need to address them fully and directly. Jonathan's composure fractured. This is exactly what she wants, he said, voice rising, to throw us into chaos, stir fear and confusion. We have a deadline. Global tech needs to move today, but his words rang hollow now. Desperation clung to every syllable. How convenient, Eleanor said, her voice edged with quiet steel. This rush to vote, it prevents proper due diligence. Tell me, Jonathan, what exactly are you afraid global tech might find if they look too closely? Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but the boardroom door burst open before he could speak. A woman in a dark tailored suit entered, flanked by two men in matching attire. She held up a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm Special Agent Keller. We have a warrant to seize specific financial records and electronic devices connected to an ongoing investigation into securities fraud at Virion Labs. Gasps rippled around the room. Jonathan turned to Eleanor, eyes burning with hatred. You called the FBI? Eleanor's voice remained steady. I submitted evidence of potential federal crimes to the proper authorities as any responsible corporate officer would. That was the moment his composure finally cracked. He lunged across the room toward a nearby laptop, one that likely contained damning evidence. "No one touches anything until our lawyers are present," he barked, frantically reaching for the keyboard. An FBI agent stepped in to intervene, but Jonathan shoved him aside, slamming his fingers onto the keys in a desperate attempt to erase the files. "David, stop!" Eleanor called, stepping forward. "You're only making this worse." But in his fury, Jonathan swung the laptop. Whether from panic or rage, the heavy machine struck Eleanor directly in the abdomen. She gasped. The room went still. One hand flew to her stomach as she staggered backward, folding with pain. "Eleanor." Marcus rushed to her side, catching her before she collapsed. He guided her gently into a chair as the FBI agent surged forward, pinning Jonathan to the floor and locking him in handcuffs. "She's faking it," he yelled, breathless and thrashing. "She's always been manipulative, trying to ruin everything I built." Still holding her side, Eleanor looked up at him. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the stunned silence. "Everything you built, Jonathan, that's always been your delusion." That was the moment the illusion shattered. The board, once divided, uncertain now, looked at Jonathan not as a leader, but as the man who had just attacked a pregnant woman in front of federal agents. Even Sienna took a step back, her expression unreadable until she moved forward. She turned to Agent Keller. "I have information for your investigation," she said quietly. "Documentation of financial manipulations I was ordered to carry out." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Sienna, what are you doing?" But she didn't look at him. "I'm choosing the truth," she said, finally. Paramedics entered the room to check Eleanor's vitals. She winced as they examined her, but waved them off gently. "Mums." "Hayes," Agent Keller said softly, kneeling beside her. "Do you need to return to the hospital?" "Not yet," Eleanor replied. "There's something the board needs to hear first." Despite protests from the medics, she slowly rose with Marcus's help, her hand never leaving her abdomen. She stood before the table, before the people who once doubted her, who now saw her clearly. "What you've seen today," she said, voice steady despite the pain, "is the result of a calculated effort to erase my work, my voice, and my legacy." She looked around the room, but it's also an opportunity for Virion Labs to begin again with integrity. She gave a small nod to Marcus, who distributed the final set of documents. "This," she said, "is a proposal, a path forward. The technology remains licensed to Virion under fair, transparent terms, and I return as Chief Innovation Officer. A governance model rooted in transparency," Eleanor concluded, "with clear reporting, ethical leadership, and a culture that values contribution over credit." Around the table, the board sat in silence, reviewing the proposal. The contrast was impossible to miss. Eleanor calm, composed, unwavering, Jonathan now gone, escorted from the room in handcuffs, his final words drowned in disgrace. Chairman James Abernathy was the first to speak. "I move that we immediately suspend Jonathan Ellis from all corporate duties pending a full investigation and empower a special committee to evaluate Ms. Hayes' proposal in detail." No one objected. Even those who had defended Jonathan just minutes earlier cast their votes without hesitation. Unanimous. As the room began to settle and federal agents led Jonathan away, still shouting, still unraveling, Eleanor finally allowed the paramedics to assist her. The pain had grown sharper, more urgent. As they eased her onto the stretcher, Sienna stepped forward, hesitant. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for all of it." Eleanor looked at her, this woman who had been rival, accomplice, witness. "Actions have consequences, Sienna," she said softly. "Don't forget that, no matter what side you stand on next." The ambulance doors closed, and for the first time since this all began, Eleanor closed her eyes, not in fear, but in surrender to the moment. The war had ended, but the true battle for her child's future was just beginning. Eleanor lay on a cushioned table, her hand wrapped tightly around the edge as Dr. Liu moved the ultrasound wand across her belly. "There she is," Dr. Liu said with a warm smile, pointing to the screen. "Strong heartbeat. Good size. Your daughter is a fighter, just like her mother." Eleanor let out a slow, trembling breath. Tension she hadn't realized she was still holding finally slipped away. After the assault, she had spent 3 days in the hospital on bed rest, grappling not with physical pain, but the paralyzing fear that she might lose her daughter. Those were the darkest hours, darker even than betrayal, darker than the courtroom. "So, everything's truly okay?" Eleanor asked, not taking her eyes off the flickering heartbeat on the monitor. Dr. Liu nodded. "The bruising has healed, blood pressure's back in the safe zone. I still want you resting and avoiding stress, but your pregnancy is stable. You both weathered the storm." As Eleanor stepped out of the medical building, a breeze touched her face, soft and cool. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, her path forward was clear. The last few weeks had been a blur of court filings, boardroom votes, and corporate restructuring, most of it conducted from a hospital bed, the rest from home under strict orders from Dr. Liu. Jonathan remained in federal custody, bail denied after investigators discovered offshore accounts and an attempted escape plan. The charges against him were serious and growing. Sienna had testified. She'd told the truth. In return, she was granted limited immunity. Eleanor's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Board approved the final restructuring plan. Unanimous vote. "Ready when you are." She smiled, typed back, "Meeting you at 2. As her car pulled up to Virion Labs, soon to be renamed, the building looked different. Not because of new branding, not because of its architecture, but because of the woman walking through its front doors. No longer using the executive side entrance, no longer hiding behind anyone's title. She walked through the atrium slowly. People turned to watch. Some paused. Others whispered, but no one looked away. She wasn't just Eleanor Hayes, the returning executive. She was a survivor, a mother, a builder of futures. And this was only the beginning. At 16 weeks, Eleanor's pregnancy had begun to show. Some greeted her return with quiet nods of respect. Others weren't sure how to react, not just to her presence, but to her transformation. The boardroom, where everything had unraveled weeks before, no longer looked the same. Gone was the long, imposing table. In its place, a circular, light-filled space, more open, more human, a symbol of what had changed and what was still to come. Chairman Abernathy rose as Eleanor entered, extending his hand. "Welcome back, Eleanor. Or should I say, welcome to Hayes Innovations." Applause rippled gently around the room. Eleanor didn't sit at the head of the table. There was no head anymore. Instead, she took her seat, as part of the circle, a deliberate design. Leadership was no longer about hierarchy. It was about shared purpose. "Thank you for your trust," she began, her voice calm and steady. "This past month has tested all of us. But today is the beginning of something new." She tapped her tablet, and the screens around the room lit up with the branding plan, Hayes Innovations, bold, modern, and grounded in purpose. "Our company was built on remarkable technology," Eleanor continued, "but too often that brilliance was undermined by broken values. Now, we have the chance to start again and do better." Over the next hour, Eleanor outlined a bold vision, transparent, accessible financial reporting, cross-functional collaboration across all levels of the company, a culture where innovation was shared, not hoarded, where contribution mattered more than competition. But perhaps the most radical shift was her proposal for industry-leading family and wellness support, on-site childcare, extended parental leave for all parents, not just birth mothers, flexible hours, and remote work options. Some may call these policies expensive luxuries, Eleanor said. I call them investments in our most valuable asset, our people. By the time she finished, the board's approval was unanimous. Eleanor was officially appointed Chief Innovation Officer, a role designed to let her focus on what she did best, building technology that shaped the future. The CEO position would remain vacant for now, temporarily overseen by a leadership committee until someone worthy emerged. As board members filed out, Marcus lingered. Quite the transformation, he said, half smiling. From fired executive to company namesake in under a month. Eleanor shook her head gently. It was never about my name on the building, Marcus. She looked down at her hands, then back toward the screen still glowing with the new company logo. It was always about building something honest, something my daughter could be proud of. Marcus nodded, thoughtful. Speaking of building, have you decided about the house? She knew which one he meant, the towering mansion in Westlake Hills, the place she and Jonathan had shared, the house that had once symbolized success and now only held shadows. The court granted me access, she said, but I'm selling it. She didn't look back. I've found a smaller place, closer to the office, with a garden and good schools nearby. As she gathered her things, a notification buzzed softly on her tablet. Jonathan's attorney, requesting a settlement meeting. He's starting to see the writing on the wall, Marcus said, glancing at the screen. He knows the case against him is solid. Eleanor tapped the screen. The message disappeared. There'll be time for that, she said quietly. But not today. Today is about what's next. The following weeks moved quickly. Hayes Innovations officially replaced Virion Labs just 6 weeks after that fateful boardroom showdown, marked not by champagne and speeches, but by a quiet ceremony. Just as Eleanor had insisted, no spotlight, no grandstanding, no idolizing of any one individual, not even herself. Only a new statement of values and the silent promise of something better. At the heart of Hayes Innovations' new mission statement were two simple but radical principles: collaborative innovation, transparent leadership. While the legal proceedings against Jonathan continued in the background, Eleanor poured her entire energy into rebuilding the soul of the company. The expanded engineering team, finally free to acknowledge their real contributions, began to thrive. A new recognition system elevated not just results, but shared effort. Michael Zhao, the IT director who had helped save the company's legacy during the purge, had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer. Under his calm, thoughtful leadership, the development floor buzzed with a sense of purpose not felt in years. By Eleanor's 6th month of pregnancy, Hayes Innovations had recovered much of its market value and signed several major new contracts. Industry analysts, once quick to predict the company's downfall, now called it a case study in ethical restoration and leadership under fire. Her doctor had finally cleared her for limited travel. Carefully paced, always with support. And so, in early spring, she flew to New York for a meeting with a major partner. She didn't expect to run into Sienna Black. They spotted each other in the lobby of the hotel, both women frozen in momentary recognition. Sienna looked different. The immaculate gloss replaced with something softer, more real. I didn't know you were staying here, Sienna said quietly. I can go somewhere else, if you'd prefer. Eleanor studied her. The woman who had once stood behind Jonathan at every turn and later had helped bring him down. The prosecutors had confirmed her cooperation had been essential. That's not necessary, Eleanor replied evenly. Are you based in New York now? Sienna nodded. A small consulting firm. Entry level. But It's a fresh start. An awkward silence settled between them. Then Sienna spoke again, her voice lower now. Vulnerable. I want you to know I'm sorry. Genuinely. Not just for the professional damage, but for the personal betrayal. I believed him when he said you were cold, controlling, holding him back. I never thought to ask why he might say that. Eleanor took a moment, chose her words carefully. We all made choices, Sienna. Yours were wrong, but so were some of mine. I chose silence over recognition. I chose partnership over self-worth. But we learn, and we move forward. Sienna blinked, surprised perhaps, expecting anger, but receiving reflection instead. How's your pregnancy? She asked. Well now, Eleanor said softly, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. She's especially active during board meetings. A ghost of a smile touched Sienna's lips. She'll be a force of nature, I imagine. That's the plan, Eleanor replied. They parted ways without bitterness. No grand reconciliation. Just closure. One more weight left behind. At 7 months pregnant, Eleanor stood on a platform she never thought she'd reach again. The ceremonial podium of the New York Stock Exchange. The bell waited in front of her, shining like a beacon of quiet triumph. Hayes Innovations was being officially relisted. A company once dragged through scandal had emerged reborn not through PR stunts, but through integrity, action, and the refusal to quit. Beside her stood Marcus Langford and the newly appointed CEO Janet Kimura, formerly of Microsoft. Brilliant, principled, unshakable. With 10 seconds to the opening bell, the NYSE host turned to the cameras. We are joined this morning by Eleanor Hayes, founder and chief innovation officer of Hayes Innovations, a company that rose from crisis to become a model of ethical leadership and collaborative technology. Eleanor rang the bell. Cameras flashed. The trading floor erupted in applause. Hayes Innovations had officially returned to the public market, opening 15% of its projected price. A clear sign the world was ready to believe in new leadership and in second chances. That evening, Eleanor sat quietly in her hotel suite, the soft city lights flickering outside the window. She sipped warm tea, her hands resting on her belly, now heavy with life. On screen, a special segment interrupted the regular financial news, the fall of Jonathan Ellis, inside the Varian scandal. She watched as footage played of him being led into a courtroom in prison overalls. Once the face of charm and charisma, now replaced by something harder, older. Bitterness aged him more than time ever could. But Eleanor didn't feel triumph. Not really. What rose in her chest instead was something more complicated. Regret for what they might have built together. Relief that justice had taken root. And resolve to create something better from the ashes. She turned off the screen and opened the nursery design plans for her new home. That, not Jonathan's fate, was her future now. A place with soft light, with warmth, with stories waiting to be told to tiny ears. At 3:17 a.m., on a quiet Tuesday morning, Eleanor's water broke. 2 weeks early, but her carefully written birth plan unfolded like clockwork. Her driver was outside in minutes. Dr. Liu had been notified. The private hospital entrance was ready and waiting. What she hadn't planned for was the people who gathered in the waiting room. Marcus arrived first, then Janet Kimura, Michael Jiao. One by one, board members came not as executives, but as friends. Even Catherine Westbrook, once Jonathan's staunchest supporter, brought a bouquet and quiet, genuine words of encouragement. After 8 hours of labor, at sunrise, Eliza Chen Hayes entered the world. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. With a cry that echoed powerfully through the room and a furrowed brow that looked remarkably like her mother's. When the nurse asked if she wanted visitors, Eleanor surprised herself by saying yes. She had expected to crave privacy, but this day felt like something that should be witnessed. Marcus entered first. His usually stern face softened as he stepped closer. "She's perfect," he said simply. "She is," Eleanor replied, then smiled, teasing, and clearly showing good judgment. She waited until after the West Corp contract was signed. One by one, her little circle of unexpected allies came to meet Eliza. They had once been a fractured board, a crisis management team, reluctant colleagues. But somewhere along the way, they had become something more. A corporate family forged not in profit, but in perseverance. Janet Kimura was the last to visit. She stayed only briefly, standing by the window with her usual efficiency. But her words, as always, were precise. "The market liked the birth announcement," she noted. "Stock is up another 3%. Apparently, investors appreciate the symbolism of new beginnings." Eleanor laughed, the first unrestrained, full laugh she'd had in months. "Always the CEO," she said, shaking her head fondly. Janet's expression softened. "Take all the time you need, Eleanor. The company is steady. Your work made that possible." After everyone left, Eleanor cradled Eliza close, watching her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall. The past year had been unimaginable. Betrayal, loss, fight, survival, but also resilience, redemption. And now, this. A child, a future, a quiet room full of hope. Jonathan's trial would end in a matter of months. The patents and ownership would be resolved. The company would evolve beyond its scars. But none of that mattered now. Not here, not in this moment, where the only thing Eleanor saw was what came next. Eleanor adjusted Eliza's carrier carefully beside her chair in the newly reimagined Hayes Innovations boardroom. The baby gurgled contentedly, wide eyes drifting toward the colorful, abstract art that now adorned the walls, replacing the somber portraits of old CEOs with something brighter, more hopeful. It was a new era, and this was their first quarterly earnings meeting since the full restructuring. The numbers were staggering, but even more powerful was the energy in the room, a sense that this company wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Janet Kimura concluded her report with a quiet pride. "The numbers speak for themselves. Revenue is up. But more than that, culture is changing." She clicked to the final slide. "Employee satisfaction, plus 147%, voluntary turnover, 62%, innovation submissions, plus 84%. Eleanor listened with quiet satisfaction, gently rocking Eliza's carrier with her foot. The baby had become the unofficial mascot of leadership meetings, a symbol of what it meant to create not just profit, but legacy. Just last week, the company's on-site childcare center, Eliza's first, had opened. It was already at full capacity. With a waitlist, Eleanor smiled to herself. As the meeting wound down, Chairman Abernathy raised one final item. "We've received a settlement offer from Jonathan Ellis's legal team. He's prepared to relinquish all claims to Hayes Innovations in exchange for dropping certain civil charges." Eleanor had expected this. Jonathan's criminal conviction had already been secured. 8 years, securities fraud, obstruction, and attempted destruction of evidence. Now he was trying to salvage what little remained. Janet added, "The legal team recommends we accept. It provides clean closure, no drawn-out court drama." Eleanor looked down at Eliza, who had fallen asleep halfway through the financial graphs. One tiny hand had slipped from the blanket, peaceful, perfect. "Accept it," she said quietly. "It's time to stop looking back. We have work to do and a future to build." As the board members filed out, Eleanor stayed seated a moment longer. Only after the last one had left did she lift Eliza's carrier gently, cradling her daughter's weight with practiced care. At the door, Michael Jiao paused. Still planning to join us for the dev team's presentation? Wouldn't miss it, Eleanor said with a warm smile. Eliza's a fan of code visualizations. I think we've got a little engineer in the making. Michael looked at the sleeping infant and smiled, like mother, like daughter. As Eleanor walked through the building, the one that now bore her name, she noticed something had changed. No more sidelong glances, no more cautious silence. Now people smiled, they waved. Some paused to admire Eliza or ask about the new daycare center. There was warmth here now, and belonging. Her office, redesigned to accommodate both leadership and motherhood, was softly lit, with a plush seat near the desk and a custom bassinet beside the window. Eleanor settled Eliza into it gently before turning to her screen. A new notification blinked in the corner settlement with Jonathan Ellis officially filed with the court. The last legal thread was now cut. He would serve his time, and one day he'd walk free. But their professional and personal bond was officially, finally, over. She turned toward the window. The Austin skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun, just like it had all those years ago, when she and Jonathan had stood in a tiny apartment, sketching out a dream on a whiteboard. They had built something significant, just not what either of them had imagined. Eleanor had lost a partner, but she had gained something far greater: a daughter, a company that reflected her true values, and a future shaped by clarity, not compromise. That afternoon, Eleanor walked into the executive room to present the quarterly innovation roadmap. Eliza, tucked in her carrier, stirred slightly. The team waited, not just for strategy, but for vision, for presence, for purpose. And Eleanor, with a quiet smile, began. From her carrier beside the conference table, Eliza watched, contentedly, eyes bright, cheeks rosy, her presence a quiet thread of joy weaving through the room. Across the table, a board member leaned toward Marcus, lowering his voice. "Remarkable transformation," he murmured. "From near collapse to industry leader, all in less than a year." Marcus followed his gaze to Eleanor, seated with grace and quiet strength, presenting the next stage of the company's growth. Composed, brilliant, and fully, unapologetically herself. Then he looked at the team surrounding her, engaged, cooperative, present. Not just employees, but believers in a shared vision. Marcus smiled, then said softly, "The greatest lesson in all this is one Jonathan Ellis learned too late." He paused, watching Eliza wave her tiny fingers toward the light. "Never underestimate what a woman will do to protect what's hers." On the screen behind Eleanor, the company's new mission statement appeared: bold, elegant, quietly powerful. Centered in crisp text was their new guiding principle: truth builds stronger foundations than deception ever could. The room was still, but something warm passed through it, a shared understanding, not just of what they had built, but why it mattered. Eliza let out a small, happy gurgle, her approval, as pure as it was unfiltered. Tiny hands reaching upward, as if toward the very future her mother was shaping. A future built not on conquest or competition, but on authenticity, resilience, and the power of choosing to begin again. If you found yourself moved by Eleanor's journey from betrayal to rebirth, we invite you to stay. Here at Shining Stories, we tell true tales of healing, justice, and unexpected comebacks, because we believe every story, even the broken ones, can bloom again. Subscribe to join us on the next journey. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. And in the comments below, tell us what moment in Eleanor's journey spoke to you the most. Thank you for being here. And remember, your greatest strength may be the one others never saw coming.